Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 162 with Mike Indovina. I had a great chat with Mike. We talked about so many things, including finding a process that works for him and the power in repeating said process, writing a book, mixing templates. We talk about mixing versus mastering and how he's able to do both. He harps on the importance of referencing, how he's able to work in the box, what mastering actually does to your mix. We talk about monitoring, getting great drum sounds, podcasting, building relationships with people, and everything in between. I really love this chat. I think you will too. So here's my chat with Mike Indovina coming up right here on Secret Sonics. Hey everyone. If you're anything like me, you often find yourself looking for business insight in podcasts. And I'm sure many of you are also into meditation and reflection to help better understand yourself. Former guest of the show, Carl Bonner, decided to launch a podcast that brings these two elements together. It's a series of guided self-reflection exercises, but specifically for freelance creatives like you and me, focusing on the struggles we face as we try to grow our businesses, while also finding more happiness in the work that we do. It's called Thanks for Thinking. It's definitely an unusual format, but if you want to grow your self-awareness, find deeper career satisfaction, and make more money, then I think this podcast might be for you. Experience it for yourself and click the link in the show notes below. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I am your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Mike Indovina. Mike is a recording, mixing, and mastering engineer based out of Toronto, Canada. He also runs the website mastermix.com, where he shares many of the lessons he's learned throughout his audio career to help thousands of musicians and engineers create better mixes that they're proud of. In addition, he hosts the Master Mix podcast, where he has interviewed many top-level audio engineers, including Sylvia Massey, Andrew Sheps, David Bottrill, and many more. I think I randomly found his podcast a long time ago, and he had a lot of great guests and some of my great guests as well. And I finally reached out to see if he'd be willing to join me on the show, which he's graciously agreed to do. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Mike.
Thank you. Your podcast is awesome. So really honored to be on here.
Yeah, likewise. I'm honored to have you on. Like, you also have a great podcast, and yeah, podcaster is podcasting.
Yeah, man, uniting.
Got to do it.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a bit about your story. You know, like me, you're always asking other people about their stories, but share with my audience a little bit about, you know, how music got started for you, how it evolved into all the things you're doing today, which is quite a lot, actually.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I'll try to sum it up. But yeah, basically, I got my start in music at the age of 10. I started playing drums, and originally I kind of got into it out of competition with a friend of mine. He was kind of like the cool kid in school, and you know, being 10 years old, I was easily jealous of people that, like, you know, getting into like puberty land, like the girls were starting to flock to him, and I was like kind of jealous. And he ended up playing drums in a band at our school talent show, and you know, everyone was like, "Oh my god, that's the coolest thing ever!" And I was like, "Screw that! I'm showing this guy up. I'm gonna take drum lessons as well." So you know, kind of got into drumming as a result of competition, but quickly fell in love with music. Then in high school, I joined my first band, and that's really where things started to shift for me as far as like taking music seriously. And I was in a band with some older guys, and they really treated the band like it was a business. And we were starting to get like really cool opportunities coming our way because we were working for it. That was kind of like the first time where I realized like, oh, if I actually put in effort at this stuff, or like, you know, I do some cold outreach to people and like, you know, pitch myself and promote myself, that like good things can happen. So that was kind of like a big turning point for me, where I was like, I want to be a rock star. And, you know, most musicians want to do that, I guess. But, you know, we were trying as much as we could. And just over the years, I was fortunate to have a few different bands that had various levels of success, and some bands that got radio play and licensing opportunities. And one band had a major label distribution deal and stuff like that. So I was just really like set on being a professional musician for a number of years. But throughout that process, one thing that I found was coming up time and time again was I was always getting frustrated with the songwriting process, because my band would jam, we'd work on songs and spend like hours and hours like trying to get the perfect arrangement and trying to get the perfect parts and lead guitar stuff and drum fills and all that stuff, right? And back then we didn't really have like interfaces available to us. So, or like even cell phones that were like any decent at recording at all. So we were kind of just relying on our memory to kind of just piece the song back together once we got together again and jammed like a week later or something like that. And I always found that like we'd forget a lot of the good stuff, and it would kind of revert back to like kind of a crappier version of where we left off. And so because of that, I was like, being a drummer and someone who wasn't like primarily like the main songwriter in the band or anything like that, I felt like I needed to like prove my role in the band as well. So I was like, well, I'm just going to be the audio engineer, and like I'll learn how to record the band, and then that way we can record these songs, and who knows what we can do with them. Maybe we shop them around to like a manager or a label or whatever, right? So like I was just like, I'm going to learn this stuff. And I was always a bit of a techie guy. I was always really fascinated. Like whenever we had shows, like I would always watch a sound guy play with all the toys that they played with. And it just kind of felt like that's a cool thing that if the band thing didn't work out, like I'd feel comfortable being an audio engineer. Like that seems like a pretty cool gig. So I was self-taught for a number of years, wasn't really making a whole lot of progress doing it. Eventually went to an audio college, and that's where, I mean, when I went to audio school, like it was more, again, like I wasn't trying to be a professional engineer at that point. It was more about like the band at that point. And I was like, oh, I'll learn to get better at engineering, but I'm also going to just take advantage of the studio time for like my own band and like just get in, have a nice studio to record in, and just like network from like the teacher's contacts and stuff like that if I could. And so that was really the reason why I went. And just when I graduated, I was just like trying to get my feet wet in as many areas of the audio industry as possible, because I just thought it was important to try to see different areas of the industry and network as much as I could. So I ended up doing like a whole bunch of audio related gigs. Like I was doing studio work, like recording music. I got into audio post-production for a few years. So I was doing like sound effects and mixing for film and television stuff. I got into live sound, tour managing. It was kind of all over the place. I really just wanted to just get that different experience and kind of just learn, if the band thing didn't work out, like what would I fall back on, and what things did I enjoy doing?
So you're trying to do all these things in sound while in parallel also trying to be a rock star.
Yeah. Which was just like, it made it hard. Because one of the things that happened with all of that was that like while I was trying to be a professional rock star and like do all these other sound gigs, was that like I had a bunch of bands that like broke up along the way. And I kind of just like, each time that happened, I felt like I was starting over again, and it was really frustrating. And I kind of realized like it was harder to depend on other people to like live out this rock star life, because if people didn't have the same goals as me, then like at any time they could be like, I'm out of the band, and then we'd have to start over. And it was just super frustrating. So every time that happened, I felt like I went like deeper and deeper into the audio industry and like just being an engineer. And so eventually my last band split up, and then I was like, okay, cool. Like we were spending a few nights a week jamming, and like now I'm just going to turn those into like opportunities to record local bands and like just go all in with the studio stuff. And so that's just kind of how I like really, that's when I really dove in and just started like, you know, taking on some free gigs here and there, and then, you know, slowly starting to get paid for stuff and just like working my way into it as much as possible. Fast forward a few years, I had a roommate of mine who he had run a pretty successful online guitar instructional website. And he kind of said to me one day, he's like, hey man, like you're really good at what you do. Like, have you ever given any thought about teaching this stuff? You know, it could be a cool way for you to just like connect with other people, maybe meet some international artists to work with or something like that. And I never thought about that as an option, but he kind of just like gave me that bug, and I started to like really go down that rabbit hole of like, okay, what would that look like? And started off I started masteryourmix.com at that time. And so that was about 5 years ago that I started off that website, maybe even longer now that I think about it. It kind of just started off with a couple blog articles here and there, and like just kind of trying to talk about recording gear and stuff like that. And it started to catch on. And then that just kind of progressed into me starting to build online courses and membership sites and the podcast.
Wow.
And I wrote a book, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And it's been a really awesome things that I've built here, because now I'm just connecting with people all over the world. And it's kind of led to some, before we hit record, we were talking about how like, you know, has the podcast helped you with like getting clients, and like that's something that helped, you know? And like, so it's kind of just created this like secondary stream of artists that I could work with outside of my local scene, you know?
Yeah.
So it's been a really cool thing that has built up, and super proud of it. Got lots of things that I still want to achieve with it. But yeah, I guess that kind of takes me to where I'm at right now.
So like, how do you divide your time? Like what percentage of your time are you working on master your mix, or mixing and mastering for artists? Like I know, like
I've always kind of been the guy that like, I just eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. And like, it's kind of hard because like my hobby is like being on my computer and just like messing around with audio gear. So like because of that, I was always kind of working in a way, because it was like, oh, I'm not working
Right.
on a project right now. Like, let's do something master mix related. And then like, vice versa. And it just like, I was just always working on this stuff whenever I could. And like to this
You've
day,
just
I
been
still,
chugging along.
yeah, to this day, I still like, like last night I went to bed at like 2:30 because I was like, oh, I got this like thing I want to do. And it's just like, whenever I have
That's
free time, I
amazing.
work on this. And
You're still hyped as ever.
I'm still hyped as ever. Like, I don't get much sleep, but that's fine. I'm fine with that. My body's used to it. But that said, like, before we were hitting record, we were talking about how I'm expecting a child soon, and like that's gonna change my life up a lot. So it's like I'm kind of like, let's just get it all done now while I got some free time, and like, we'll see what free time I have later on.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's gonna be an adjustment period for sure, and eventually you'll find a new routine. That's my my dad advice. Like I know like I'm in like a period of upheaval of like not doing anything because like we just have a newborn at home. My wife's on maternity leave, and even when I try to do stuff, it doesn't always work out. So
oh yeah,
I'm sure eventually we'll find a routine, although we're not there yet, But like we found a routine with our son eventually, and then we had a pandemic, and now eventually we'll find a routine with our daughter, and then hopefully there won't be a pandemic.
yeah, totally. I think I'm okay with no routine. Like I'm kind of better that way sometimes.
Really,
I don't know why.
that's cool, man. I struggle with chaos. I need to learn to embrace it more. That's like one of my big struggles, I think, in life.
Yeah.
I just don't do well with it, and I wish I did, because I feel like living a creative life is very chaotic. Like I see my friends that are super creative, and they're just like all over the place. It's like, oh, let's do this now. I'm totally into that. Let's go.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, wait, but I scheduled to do this now. What am I gonna do? And it just totally throws me for a loop. But but it's hard. It's hard to like. It's hard for me to kind of do creative stuff when that it's so like it could just come and go at any moment,
Absolutely.
So sounds like you'll do well with the chaos of having a child.
Hopefully, I guess I'm like kind of like sleep training myself to not have much sleep, and deal with the child. I'd like to think that that's the case, but I guess there's a difference between like me going to bed thinking like, okay, it's really late now, and I can sleep for a full 6 hours or something like that, versus a baby crying in the middle of that, and you have no control and all that stuff. So yeah, I'll learn a lot along the way.
Yeah. You'll have to figure it out. Damian Taylor, who was on the show, told me, he's like, you have to start thinking about nighttime as the beginning of the next day. So like, we always procrastinate going to bed at the end of the night, because like that's it, the day's over. Maybe whatever I was meant to do in that day is like, or whatever I could have done in that day is that window is now closed. But you really have to think about it as like pulling the arrow for the next day. It's like, how good of a day am I going to have tomorrow if I go to sleep on time, if I prioritize sleep?
That's great advice.
And yeah, I don't know if I'm there yet, but it's something that I think about a lot.
Yeah.
Wait, so back to your audio journey. Like, did you have any mentors, anybody specifically that kind of helped guide you when you didn't really know what you were doing?
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, when I didn't. Like I said, when I first started, I was trying to like just self-teach myself, and it was like back then it was like reading books and magazines, and reading forums, and YouTube and all that kind of stuff, like whatever I could. And I felt like I wasn't really making progress there, because I guess it's one of those things where like when you don't know what you don't know how to look up the answer for it, And so eventually, like I said, I did go to an audio college, and that definitely helped me, because I had learned a lot on my own, and I felt like in some ways I got a lot out of audio college, in some ways I didn't. Like as far as the engineering side of things, like a lot of like my first year at least was like kind of basics that I had already kind of discovered for myself. But I really tried to network a lot with my teachers and like become really good friends with them. And I was very fortunate that the school I went to had a couple like really amazing engineers. One guy was a guy named Kevin Doyle. He won like a couple Grammy Awards and Juno Awards. And another guy was Jack Richardson, who he like discovered the Guess Who and worked with like Alice Cooper, and he was like kind of a big. He's in some ways he was like kind of like the grandfather of the Canadian music scene. His son is Garth Richardson, who like produced the first Rage Against the Machine record.
Oh yeah.
So
I've been in touch with him. Maybe one day we'll get on the show.
Yeah, Garth's awesome.
Yeah.
But like so like I had those guys really helping me out a lot early on, and they kind of just put things into a lot of perspective for me, like beyond just like the basic academia of like, what's a compressor, what's an EQ, that kind of thing. Like they would like critique my mixes and give me a lot more feedback than I think they helped out a lot of people with in the classes. Cause like I would just stick around after class and be like, hey, listen to this, let me know, like, what am I screwing up on, that kind of thing. So like those guys helped me a lot early on. There was another guy I worked with for a few years named Alan Ormerod, who he's a pretty well-known name in the Canadian audio post-production industry. And so he's mixed a lot of big TV shows and won a whole bunch of awards for that stuff. He taught me a lot about the audio post-production world, but more importantly, like I really learned a lot from him as far as like my workflow went. And I definitely have to credit him for helping me like establish what my workflow is to this day, because like before I met him, I'd spend like hours working on mixes. Like I'd spend days sometimes, right? Because I was just like, I had no process to follow, or like I just kind of was working very randomly. And when I started working with Alan, we were working on films that were like 2 hours long, and we had to turn them around in like a day, you know? And so I'm like, okay, how is it that like he can finish an hour long film in like, 6 hours, and I'm taking days to finish a 3-minute song? You know what I mean? Like there's something doesn't add up here. And so really it was like watching him, and he had like a very specific process that he went through with every mix, and like used certain tools at a certain part of the process. And, it kind of just solidified to me that like I needed to figure out what that was for myself, and how to translate that to like working on music. And so he worked with me a lot to like help figure that out, and to be able to actually mix bigger projects faster. And yeah, and then like once I stopped working with him, it was like it just made sense in the music world, like how to apply those same principles and put them into that
systematize stuff. And
yeah, because it was like, I think when you're first starting off, like you don't really know what you're listening for, and you're kind of just like, okay, like here's a problem with the kick I hear. Oh, now the guitar is bothering me, I'm gonna fix this. And then now the vocal is bothering me, and I'm gonna fix this. And you're kind of just like all over the place. And with Alan, it was like he had a very clear process with like audio post-production, where it was like he would first clean up all of the audio. He would like denoise the background, remove all the background noise and all of the dialogue for like a whole pass of the whole film. So like, that would take him like an hour, and he would just do it all in real time. And so like now his audio was all clean. And then he like went back through and did another pass where it was just like EQ. And then he went through again where it was like another pass of compression, and like then automation. And like he had this like very specific path that he went through with this whole film. And I was like, man, like that's friggin' brilliant. Like, how can I apply it to music? And for me, it was just like, I kind of realized, okay, I have to organize my session before I start it. I'm not going to be like creating tracks as I mix and, like routing signal, all that kind of stuff. Like I had to get all of that out of the way. I templated things as much as possible. And then it was like kind of making a rough pass of the mix and getting a rough balance. And then it was like actually doing the heavy lifting and like processing tracks. And even then, like it was like figuring out, okay, like what order do I want to work in the tracks? And for me, I was like, okay, I'm gonna start with the drums, and I'll go to the bass and guitar, vocals, and I kind of built my mix up that way. So that's still to this day how I do it. Like I kind of work in that order, and then adding some effects. And then the last stage of the process for me is automation. And it's like, once I'm done automation and I've gone through every track, like I'm done that mix. Like whether I like it or not, I'm done. And like that's when I give my mix to my clients, and I'm like, cool, what do you think of this? Like maybe I hit the mark, maybe I didn't, but like I need to stop here and like get your approval on this.
Right.
But
I do that pre-automation, but I totally feel you.
Yeah. But it's like, but that was kind of like my workflow. And I was like, okay, I'm going to stick to this as much as possible. And to me, it's just like that question of like, when is the mix done is always so hard for people to answer. And to me, it's just like when I'm done automation, whether I like it or not, like.
That's so funny. Yeah. Wow. So that's really a thing, a system. Like it's like a real system,
Oh yeah, totally.
I dig it. I never heard that before. When I'm done automating, it's done. And then if somebody has revisions, then it's just a new pass or whatever. It's just a V1, V2.
Totally. Well, I mean, that's like, so I wrote a book, The Mixing Mindset, and it is basically.
I was guessing that this was like the basis for your book.
It is totally. It's all about that process and understanding the tools and like knowing what to do and when. So yeah, that really was the reason for the book.
So this process that you learned from, I forgot his name, Alan?
Alan, yeah.
Yeah, so you learned the process, that you realized that processes were a thing from Alan. You applied one to yourself, and then you wrote a book about it. What was that like to write a book?
It was a long process, and to be honest, like I didn't really know what I was doing when I started it. Like I remember it was when there was a time, I guess like 5 or 6 years ago, I was moving, and I had to like, my wife had my car, and so I had to take the train to our new house, and I was just like sitting on the train for an hour bored, and I was like, let's just write down some stuff. And I've never written, I didn't seek out to write a book. I was just like, let's just start writing. And I don't know why the inspiration hit. And then it kind of was like, at the end of the train ride, I was like, wow, I got some ideas here, and like I'm just gonna expand on it. And just whenever I had some free time, I would go back and like add to it, and then eventually, like probably a year or so later, I was like, wow, I think I have a book here. Like I should probably turn this into something. And
Wow.
that was it. Like I don't know why I started writing it, but like I just felt like I needed to document my process a little bit more and maybe like solidify it and like get it on paper as opposed to just in my head. And so yeah, like once that was done, I was like, I think I have a book here. I should probably do something with this. And
That's
that was
so
it.
cool. Dude, that's amazing. Did you get any publishers behind it, or just did it yourself?
It's all self-published, but it like very quickly became like a #1 Amazon bestseller for a while, and so it's just like it's out there, and just I'm selling it self-published.
That's crazy. That's a crazy story. You're just like, oh, yeah, let me just try this, and then bam, you have a book, and then it goes like #1 on Amazon.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think what I just keep hearing this from you, like you're just so energized and jazzed about everything that like you just keep at it, and just like eventually something will come. If you keep writing the book slowly, eventually those pages fill out, and then you have a book. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing the same thing with like a follow-up that like I kind of the other night I was like, oh wait a minute, I got this book on my hard drive that I started like 2 years ago. I should probably like see where I'm at with that, and just spent that night writing a little bit, and probably next week I'll get to another page or something like that. It's just slowly but surely putting it together.
Just the tenacity of just keeping at it.
I'm also like a lifelong learner. I love learning new things and love learning new challenges. So kind of like the process of making a book and self-publishing it and seeing like how to market yourself with that, like I don't know, I'm really fascinated with that side of things too. So just keeps me learning new things.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
When you do the same process for so long, and like what is that? What has that taught you? Like I think like a lot of people will do the same process for like maybe 3 years or something, and then they'll switch it up for like another 3 years, and they'll switch it up again for like 3 years, or I don't know, however long. Like what doing the same process, starting with the drums, or I'm not totally, I don't have it all down because I haven't read your book yet, but like what has that taught you by being consistent, I guess?
There's power in consistency. And I think it's like when you work with familiar tools, things go faster and you feel more confident in it. And like when you don't have consistency, you're kind of all over the place. You're experimenting with new things. And like a perfect example of that is so many people will add will try out a different EQ plugin or a different compressor or that kind of thing. And I feel like every time I do that, I try out something new, it takes me so much longer to finish a mix because now I'm focused on like learning that tool in the moment, and like it takes me out of like the creative headspace that I was originally in. Because now I'm just trying to learn a new tool, and like, I don't know, there's something that I've just become super comfortable with using the same EQs and same compressors and stuff like that, because I just know them so well that I don't have to think about anything. It's just, I react based on the music rather than trying to figure out the plugin and react to the plugin, Like for years, I was using the Waves Renaissance 6 equalizer. That was my go-to EQ, and I use it for everything. I used it probably for like 10 years or so. And then finally, everyone was always talking about the FabFilter Pro Q, and I was like, I just was putting it off. I was like, I don't need this. I know.
Yeah.
And anyway, so like I ended up like going to a conference, and there was a raffle, and I ended up winning Pro Q3. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll finally try it. And like I started using it in my mixes, and I noticed my mixes were taking me so much longer because I was just trying to figure out this new tool and like just get used to like where things were, the graphical interface, that kind of stuff. And like it's EQ, so like it should sound the same as when I was using the Renaissance equalizer. Right. But like it was just like I just reacted differently because I was like learning this new unfamiliar thing. Now that I've like used the Pro Q3 like a lot, I'm so much more comfortable with it and faster at it now. But it took me a long time to get used to it. And really the only reason why I got into like actually committing to use it was just for the teaching aspect of it, because it had like the option where you can solo the frequency band. Yeah. And so you can hear like what you're listening to. And like I use that for teaching all the time. So that was really the only reason I got into it. And just like through teaching people with it, that I got familiar with it. And now it's in my template and I use it all the time. But yeah, just to go back to your question, I think just like being consistent makes you work faster, and it eliminates a lot of those like mechanical decisions, and just makes you focus way more on the music and your gut feelings to it. And
yeah, I love that. That's so good. Yeah, so I guess you don't get like distracted by all the flashy new plugins. Like Sooth 2 comes out, and you're like, I don't care.
I've never used Sooth. I have no idea how it works. Like
amazing. Yeah. Sometimes it does what you want it to do, and sometimes it's overkill.
It's funny, like I would say that I am a bit of a plugin junkie to some degree because I do a lot of coaching and like a lot of my students have different plugins. So I'm like, okay, I'll pick this one up just so that I'm compatible with what they've got and that kind of thing. And every time I buy something, I have I intend to learn how to use these plugins. And then I'm like, no, why? Like I have my thing. It works. I don't need to like experiment with all these new things. It's going to slow me down.
Yeah. Are you having problems with a website that doesn't actually bring in any quote requests for your studio? It's probably because you're not using EasyFunnels, the #1 website builder for recording studios. With EasyFunnels, you don't just launch your website and move on with your life. Instead, you make use of their A/B testing feature to test 2 versions of your website at one time. All of your website traffic gets evenly split between version A and version B, so you can learn which version actually gets more quote requests. The #1 rule of having a website that actually brings you clients is always be testing. With EasyFunnels, you can always have an A/B test running, so you no longer have the problem of a pointless, ineffective website. Special for Secret Sonics listeners, if you're ready to start using EasyFunnels today, you can get 50% off your first 3 months by going to easyfunnels.io/secretsonics, and there's a link in the show notes below, so go check it out. All right, back to the episode. Well, let's talk about your template. Like, how fleshed out is it? Because some people it's just routing. Some people have like built-in EQs that pretty much are where they need to be. Like, there's like the Billy Deckers, and then there's the there's everything in between. So what does it look like for you?
For me, I kind of teach templates as like, I think there's 2 different types of templates. There's like what I would call like the starting point template, which is where you have like basically a blank slate and your tracks are created, your routing is created, your plugins are off, that kind of thing. Like there's no settings built in. And to me, that's how my template started for years. It was just like, let's get up and running really quick and like I'll add plugins as I go and add settings and blah, blah, blah. But I also felt like over the years, I started to like document my process and started to realize, okay, these are the things that I do on every mix. I always add a high pass filter here, or like I cut this frequency typically with a kick drum or something like that. And so I just started making lists of like all of the things that I was doing. And from that, I was like, okay, well, let's start building it into the template. And then like, that's what I would call like my all buttons in template, where everything is on, all the things are routed, all that kind of stuff. And it slowly just started as like, turning on a plugin here or there and adding a high pass filter or adding a little cut and that kind of thing. And just over time, I kind of got to a point where now I can drop everything into my template. All my plugins are on with like kind of some standard settings, or at least frequencies are roughed out to roughly like kind of where I might boost or cut. And like, honestly, with my template, when I throw stuff in, I actually have like a template class where I show this. If all the tracks are labeled properly, I can get my mix sounding like 80% done within like 7 minutes. Like, just I literally drop it in there and like, I've got my sample tracks loaded up. They're already firing with like drum samples and stuff like that. I've got like kind of all the tools that I would usually use. And it's on and
got to clip gain into it.
Pretty much. Yeah. Like that's it. It very much is like that Billy Decker approach of like just having everything ready. And I know some people will say like, well, then doesn't everything sound the same? Because it's like the same template and same boosts and cuts and stuff.
Right.
And it's like, no, because every song sounds different. The key of every song is different. The tempo of the song is different. The performers are different. The timbre of their voices and their instruments that you use. Like, there's so many different elements that contribute to the sound of the music that I don't think the template makes it sound the same. And I experiment with different drum samples, that kind of stuff, if I need it. And it's not like I don't touch my EQs or any of that. Like, I'm still reacting to the song and figuring out what it needs to serve the song. But I just have like most of my bigger kind of common decisions done so that it makes it even faster. I mean, it still takes me like a few hours to finish a mix. I'm not quite at the Billy Decker speed, because like I might get 80% of the mix done in like the first like 7 minutes, but then I'm like, that last 20% does take a lot longer because then I start to get picky and I kind of reverse engineer my template to some degree to like modify things for the song,
Right.
But it gets me up and running pretty quickly. And that's, I'd rather it sound like a song right away than just like a big puzzle that I got to somehow mash up together to make it sound like a song,
Right. Tell me about reverbs and delays, like effects. Like, is that stuff that's maybe a little bit more dependent, or do you have like kind of like common throws for that stuff? Like, what does that look like?
I have common plugins that I like to use, but like at the end of my template, I probably have like 30 different effects channels that are just like multiple types of reverbs that I like, or different delays and different delay times and stuff like that. And I just like, they're pretty much either made inactive, like to start the template or to start at the beginning of the project, or some like the main ones are on. But like I have them in my template just so I don't have to go building channels and finding the plugin and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, reverb wise, like I think I do the pretty standard things that most people do. Like I'll have like a short plate, a long plate, a hall sound, a couple delay channels for vocals, maybe like kind of like a roomier sound for drums if I need to like create a sense of ambience there, that kind of stuff. And then I've got some more experimental things where like I'll have like super long reverb times that are just like self-oscillating and stuff like that, or delays that are doing that kind of stuff, or just like creative channel strips that like maybe a cool effect that I like, or like a telephone effect or something like that, So I just try to like, it's built into the template so that I don't have to like really rebuild it every time I have that idea. I can just like turn on an insert or turn on a send and go.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I've been talking to people about stems and what labels are now asking for. I don't personally do a lot of major label stuff, but people basically with like the whole Dolby Atmos thing and what labels are requesting of people for stems these days. It's changing the way people mix in terms of like less stereo bus processing and more like bus channel processing. What's your approach with that stuff? Are you still mixing into limiters and compression, or like I don't know what?
Yeah, like I don't do a lot of label work myself either. I work with a lot of independent artists, and I think the deliverables are always going to be different depending on who you're working with, right? But for the most part, I mean, as far as deliverable goes, most of the time I'm just exporting like a stereo mix for people. That's pretty much all they need. Or I'll make like an instrumental version, or maybe backing track versions if they're playing with tracks live, that kind of thing. So I'll bounce out a few different deliverables for that, and then usually as far as like mixing into a limiter or compressor, that kind of stuff, I usually do. I master like pretty much everything in the mix.
I saw that on your website. I wanted to ask you about that. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, I pretty much master everything that I mix, just because like I know I feel way more confident in my master. Like I primarily do a lot of mastering work these days, so I kind of have like a good sense of like where it's gonna go and what I want it to sound like. So I kind of I master my own work. So because of that, I feel more comfortable like mixing into a bus limiter or bus compressor, that kind of thing.
No, I totally get that. I mean, I also am doing that, but I'm thinking about how maybe to like do it a little bit more backwards than I've been doing. I've been doing it like very much, you mix into the stereo bus. There, usually have like an SSL style compressor, and so maybe even some saturation and compression and EQ and stuff. And I'm thinking maybe let's bring that earlier in the chain to just try it and see what that feels like.
Totally. I mean, for me, like I set my, like I usually do the SSL kind of thing as well, and I usually set that pretty much as soon as I've got the drums done, because like that's the most transient thing. So to me, that's the thing that compressor is more likely to be grabbing. So once I've got my drums kind of balanced the way I want, then I'll usually put on that compressor and just see where it's sitting and dial in my settings from there. And for the most part, I don't really have to touch it after that. It just lives where I need it to live.
Yeah. What's your attack time on the SSL?
Ooh, that changes. It's usually a little bit on the slower side. So I think it's like the, what is it? Like the 10 or the 30 knob. Like, kind of like one of the last two settings on that, because I like to have the transient cut through, and then usually my release is either like on the auto setting or the 0.1 setting. The
fastest,
the fastest. It depends. Like I'll kind of play around with it to see what feels most comfortable and like what's grabbing the least and what just seems what feels most natural. And but yeah, for the most part, I mean those are my standard go-to settings with the SSLs. And usually only hitting it like a couple dB of compression, that's it.
Nice, amazing. Yeah, I'm also like usually using like the, what's it called? The 10 millisecond attack and fastest release. Okay, so mastering your own mixes. That's just bonkers for me, because like actually I master with a guy named Connor Salmoro, who's in Toronto.
Toronto guy.
I super heavily rely on his QA, and we have a lot of like, we talk a lot. So it's like, okay, cool. Yeah. Like he basically tells me where I can go better on the mix, and sometimes I tell him where that wasn't what I was going for with the master. Can you change it up? Like having that relationship with him, and also just like that second set of ears is so valuable for me. So I'm just curious. For me, like I've lost objectivity by the end of a mix. So how do you wear both hats? How do you do it? Like, what's that like for you?
I think part of it has to do with the fact that, like we talked about, like I have the template that gets me up and running really quickly. So I'm not like, I'll spend a couple hours on the mix, 2 to 3 hours on a mix, and I don't feel like I'm entirely burnt out on the song at that point. Versus someone who spends a lot more time and has listened to the song 1,000 more times. You know what I mean? Like you kind of, the more you listen to something, the more you lose your objectivity, right?
That's true.
And so I try to keep things as fast as possible so I retain as much of that as possible. But I'm also like really big on constantly checking reference tracks. I think that's really important to the whole process because I want to make sure that I'm in the right ballpark to whatever is commercially out there and whatever the band likes, that kind of thing. So I'm always asking for reference tracks, and I have my own set of reference tracks that I listen to for certain genres. And so I'm always A-Bing them. And I think that helps me to just make sure I'm in the right ballpark of, my balance, and also making sure that like the frequency balance is fine too. And like not just balance and levels, but frequency wise is really important. And that just from that, like just constantly going back and forth, like I feel like I'm more comfortable and confident with the end result. Like I feel like I can master it because I'm in the ballpark of where I want it to be. So, what more do I need to do? To me, like the best plugin in the world is the Metric AB plugin by Plugin Alliance. I think like everybody should have that plugin. It's like honestly my favorite plugin ever because it allows you to really calibrate your ears very quickly in the middle of a mix. Plus the fact that it has like the frequency graph and everything like that, where you can compare your song against the other song. It does the volume matching, all that kind of stuff. Like to me, it just really helps. Yeah, just really calibrate your ears and just make sure that you're in that right ballpark. And I'm constantly switching back and forth between reference tracks to make sure that everything's sounding good.
That's really cool. Yeah, the truth is I really should get that plugin.
It's like always on sale. Like it's like right now you could probably get it for like $20 on their
I know,
their website,
Plugin Alliance always
sale.
everything's always on sale, and then they send you the vouchers, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, you've just convinced me. I'm in. Let's do it next time.
Do it, man. It's like that plugin. Like when I first bought Pro Tools, it did come with I think it was called like Magic AB or something like that, and I used that a lot, but it was just a little bit slower of a process to get that to work right. And then once I downloaded Metric AB, it was like, whoa, like this just works so much better. And you can load in like, I think it's like 16 different reference tracks. So you can very quickly switch between things and sync them up to the timing of your song. And I don't know. I think it's such a good plugin. And the fact that you can then save like presets that like I have like a pop punk preset where it's got like all of my pop punk references that I like. And then I usually leave a few slots left over for like, if the band has a specific reference that they like, I can throw those in there. So, I've got that. I've got like a metal one. And like, I just basically have created these little playlists that are just built into my template that I can quickly turn on and off and compare my mix against.
Yeah, that's so smart. When you feel like you're starting a master, and when you're at the mastering stage of the mix, I guess, well, you're mastering your mix .com. Do you feel like you're switching a mindset of like, hey, like I'm not listening to the trees anymore. Now I'm just listening to the forest. Do you feel like that there's like a mental switch that you're able to kind of do?
Totally. Like I often do bounce out my mix and then bring it into a separate mastering session. Like I don't necessarily like master in the mix. I'll often just like kind of get my mix to a point where I feel like it's sounding really good. And for the most part, it'll be like 90% of the way there. And then my automation stage is done and I'm done with my mix. And then I'm like, cool, bounce it out, throw it into another session that's just for mastering. And then that kind of gets me in that like mastering headspace where I'm like, okay, I can't mess with the individual levels. Like, what do I need to do to clean up the song as a whole? And yeah, if there is something at that point where I'm like, okay, I'm way off with like my balance of my snare or something like that, then I'll go back into the mix and fix it. But like, but that's like basically what I would do as a mastering engineer anyway. Like if someone sends me files and I'm like, I think that there's something that would be better fixed in the mix, I'll recommend that so that the mastering process can go smoother and that we get a better result. That's definitely something that I pride myself in as a mastering engineer. I like being able to give advice to people, as long as they're open to it, because it just makes the project that much more professional in the end because we're working together here. It's more collaborative. I'm not the kind of guy that will just take your mix and like mangle it to all hell just to like try to fix something. it. Yeah. So I'd rather preserve a really good sounding mix and just kind of tweak it lightly with mastering than try to like manipulate it to make it sound the way I think it should have been in the mix.
Yeah. I do struggle with that personally of like if, for whatever reason, there's like no budget and I just need to put a limiter on it or whatever,
Yeah.
like if I'm like, mastering it, pseudo mastering it, then I can't really get out of the headspace of like, oh, that's changing what the bass is doing, or that's changing how the snare drum, reacts. Like I can't separate the separate instruments in that mastering stage. I can't like move past that,
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that struggle, right? Because like we all have this tendency to want to just get so in the weeds, but we have to remember that nobody is listening to these songs as like a kick and a snare and guitar and that kind of stuff, right? They're listening as a whole. So I think we need to remind ourselves of that fact and just kind of like try to check out and listen to it as a whole. And that's a really big reason why I use that Metric AV plugin, so that I can like very quickly calibrate my ears.
Yeah.
Like often I'll just like switch to a reference song for like 2 seconds, like literally 2 seconds, just to hear how widely different my mix is frequency wise. And like that just forces me to like not think about the snare volume or that kind of thing. It's just like really like frequency balance. Where is my mix sitting compared to that? And it's just like a calibration tool. So that's really the reason why I'm such a big advocate for that plugin.
No, it makes a lot. I really feel that. Yeah, I feel like this is going to be one of the next stages of me. Always. We're lifetime learners, like we talked about, right? Like getting better at mixing all the time. Never ends. So this just seems like a cool route for me to kind of explore a bit more deeply.
Totally. But I also think too, like I think the other thing with reference tracks that's great is that it really helps you to have a clear vision of where you're trying to go with a mix right away. Mm-hmm. Because what I think happens with a lot of people is they just open up their session, they start working on their own mix right away, and then hours or days goes by and they finally finish their mix, and then they listen to another song and they're like, this sounds nothing like the stuff I really like. And so then you have to go back to the drawing board and start all over again.
Right.
And I think that when you have a clear vision of what you want it to sound like, then you're able to work from a more productive standpoint. You can almost like create a checklist for yourself of the things that you want to accomplish and the moves that you need to make to get it closer to that final sound.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I feel like so many of us, because we love this so much and we're happy to spend so much time just like fiddling, we kind of go in our own little loops with our brains and we don't even know where we're going. And sometimes it's cool because you could be really creative and make something really unique, and you can, it's also just fun, but it's also like, just check yourself every once in a while, right? Like it's like artists that like spend a year making a record and, then nobody listens to it, versus the artist that puts out a cover every week and then an original once a month or whatever. And they're constantly getting feedback from an audience that's telling them what they like and what they don't like. And then they can make a record for an audience that wants to hear it and, custom tailor it to that audience,
Absolutely. I mean, look, this is fun. Like, it is fun to play with these plugins and to experiment with different tools and that kind of stuff. But I think that you have to separate the fun from the work time, and like if you're just experimenting and playing with things just for the sake of playing with things or learning a new plugin, like every time you hit play, you're losing your objectivity on the mix. So I think it's like for me, what I do all the time is like in my free time, I'll open up an old mix and I just start messing around with stuff. To me, that's learning time, but when I'm actually working on a mix, like it's using my familiar tools and just getting it done as fast as I can.
Yeah. So, in the words of Flight of the Conchords, it's business time.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if you're familiar.
Yeah.
Amazing. I love it, dude. Yeah. Well, I'm curious in terms of like your workflow. Are you entirely in the box? Are you hybrid? Like what does that look like? And maybe is it different for mastering versus mixing?
Totally. I'm all in the box these days. It's funny. Like I have like racks of gear in front of me and I don't use any of it. And I always debate whether I should sell my stuff. I used to have like a commercial space that I would record bands in. And for that purpose, I like to have all the outboard gear and like track with it. But I closed up that studio about 4 years ago. And just because like the studio that I was renting my room out of, they closed down. And it kind of just made me think like, do I really want to be doing this? Like how much more do I want to be like recording bands? And to be honest, I've kind of moved away from recording bands and doing full production stuff just because like right before COVID, I'd say I did like a earnings to time analysis to see like, like what projects brought in the most money per hour, that kind of thing. And like, I just like really broke down all of my projects. And I realized like, as much as I love playing with all the gear and as much as I love like hanging out in the studio with bands, like I really wasn't earning that money. I wasn't really earning a lot of money doing it because I was like waiting so long for bands to tune up or to like get their parts right and this and that. And like I would just always charge a flat fee. So, obviously the longer the project went, the less my dollar per hour was. And so like that was a really big observation for me. And I was kind of like, well, I make more money like mixing and mastering. And I actually prefer mastering and I'm really fast at it. So like I've really, especially over COVID, like kind of just dropped all the full production stuff and have focused entirely on like mixing and mastering and more so on the mastering side of things. Just because like, yeah, I'm really good with like I'm not to sound cocky, but like I feel like I'm really good at it. I'm fast with it, and I can earn more per hour. So why not double down on that?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. So mastering has become your jam.
Totally, like I love it. It's a lot of fun. Like, I mean, I love mixing too, and it's like great to like basically put together a puzzle with audio. So yeah, like mixing or mastering, I love. They're both a puzzle that I enjoy doing. I love like I love hearing a transformation in things. And both of those give me that.
Yeah. What about specifically mastering? Have you find that's really scratched your itch?
I think that I don't know. I just love the fact that like you can make a song sound so different in a very short period of time if you use the right tools. And like and when I say different, I don't necessarily mean like completely different, like I said earlier, I don't want to like transform the mix. That's not the point, but I just want to like polish something up and make it sound a little bit nicer, a little bit sweeter, a little bit bigger, louder, that kind of thing. I don't know. I just take a lot of pleasure in like hearing how sometimes even small changes go a really long way.
Totally. That like one little dip at like 300 changes the entire tonality of the song.
And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with objectivity. It's like I'm the most objective when I work fast and I have like one like kind of finished mix to work on versus, spending 20 hours in the studio with a band or like, and then like going through the editing and then going through the mixing and all that stuff. Or even just in the mixing process, like, spending hours doing that, like you lose your objectivity very fast when you spend a lot of time on stuff. So for me, the mastering side of things just kind of makes sense because I enjoy doing it. It's fast. And like, yeah, I also learn stuff from mixes as well. I learn like what to do and what not to do. Like I learn a lot about production just by listening to the way that people produce their tracks and stuff too. So I don't know. It's pretty cool. I really enjoy it. And the mastering side of things has definitely also allowed me to same with mixing, has allowed me to like work with more international people because I don't need to be in the same room as them. So they can just send me a track and I get to do that. And these days, most of my work is international.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Look at us. You're in Canada. I'm in Israel. Israel,
right?
like
the internet's a wonderful thing.
It is. It's an amazing thing. Based on what you're saying, I have a question for you because, it's interesting because we're all referencing mastered tracks, right? Everybody's always only, the only tracks you can listen to are masters, right? Because that's what you go on Spotify. That's what you listen to. Totally. That's what you're popping in your Metric AB. Not a lot of people hear what mixes sound like before mastering. What do you feel like is missing from a mix? What do you see usually happening? What's that missing thing between the mix and the master?
That's a great question.
And maybe even when you're doing it for a mix that you did.
That's a great question. I think the biggest thing is the glue. Like things will sound like wildly out there, like sometimes you'll get like that snare track that's like super loud or that vocal track that's super loud and everything else feels buried against it. Whereas like a master can kind of glue those things together and make it sound a lot more cohesive. So I think that's a big part of it. And I think some of that has to do with people just not applying like bus compression and that kind of thing. In a way, like I prefer that people don't do it rather than do it incorrectly and like overdo it. But I think that's one big thing. The other is just frequency balance as well. And again, I think that comes back down to people just not comparing their music against their favorite artists and that kind of thing, because people will just work in isolation and it's done. And then they send it to someone else and they're like, hey, does this translate well? And then it's like, then maybe you have to do a little bit more work on it.
So you think if people did more referencing to masters in the genre that they're going for, there would be less to do in the mastering stage. It would be more
100%.
Just kind of QA and maybe bring up the level a bit.
Totally. That was a big lesson that I also learned from one of my bandmates, a guy named Brian Lowe, who he works out of Joa Carvalho Mastering in Toronto. And so he's in my band, and we were like, our band was all like engineers, so we like recorded our own stuff all the time. And the thing with Brian that really like struck my attention was anywhere we worked out of, like whether it was my place, his place, or any other studio that we were in, the very first thing he would do before we put on our mix was he had this playlist that he always had on like. He had like on a USB stick or something like that. He would just bring it around, right? And like there was one song in particular that he would listen to, and it was Beverly Hills by Weezer. Like for whatever reason, that was his song he listened to on every set of speakers we worked on to calibrate his
I actually
ears.
saw Weezer when they were touring that record in 2005. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I saw them on that tour as well.
The Fray were opening for them, and nobody knew who the Fray was.
Oh, that's a great band. I'd love to see those guys.
And then they completely blew Weezer out of the water like a few months later. It was one of those like moments, you know?
Yeah. But
and Take Back Sunday also opened.
Oh, that's cool. That's a weird lineup, I guess.
It was a crazy lineup. Yeah, out on Long Island. Yeah.
Weird.
Anyways, sorry for cutting you off.
No, it's all good. But so anyway, like I watched Brian do this every time we worked, and it was just a calibration thing, you know, and that's the reason why he did it. He wanted to understand like how much bass he was supposed to be hearing coming out of the speakers in that specific room, or how much treble and that kind of stuff. And he was the guy that kind of really showed me like, listen to reference tracks, calibrate your ears as much as possible, because if you do that, you can get your mix closer to the final master just by A-Bing stuff. And so that was something that I definitely took from him and heavily used to this day, you know?
Yeah.
So
it's funny you mentioned that. My acoustician, Omer Karni, who's probably he's like the number one home studio setup guy in Israel. And he always has like a playlist that he brings with him when he sets up the acoustics of a room. And it's like he did 2 rooms for me. In the second room, it was the exact same song that he put on from the first room of like, oh, what is this room sounding like? You know, he has his like acoustics playlist. And it's the same thing. He's just trying to calibrate like what the room is doing.
It makes sense. It's the simplest thing, and it's like it's funny that we just don't think about it. And it's also like, sorry to harp on like reference tracks so much, but I think it's just so important to learn how your speakers are in your room. And I also know a lot of people that listen to tons of music in their car, but then they only work on their studio monitors. They don't listen to music on their studio monitors. So they've never really learned what a mix that translates should sound like coming out of their speakers in their room. So the more you listen to music on your speakers, the more your ears are going to get calibrated to your room, and the quicker you're going to be able to identify if you're in the right ballpark.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Got to turn your studio also into a chill zone sometimes. And
totally. Well, I think that's why, like, you know, like I said, like my hobby is just like hanging out on my computer and researching stuff and all that. And like, I'm always listening to music there. So like subconsciously my ears are just getting conditioned to the room and that kind of thing. Right.
I love it. What are you monitoring with these days? What's your monitoring setup?
So I have KRK Rocket 8s that I love. And I think KRKs get a bad rap all the time. Like a lot of people talk shit about them, but like, a lot of people criticize them because they have a lot of bass, and I would actually rather that they have a lot of bass than like an NS10 where I feel like I can't hear the bass, because I feel like I can trust it more. And also, I've just had them for years, and I've owned like multiple sets of them throughout the years, and so I just really know what they sound like. So to me, like they work super well, and I've mixed enough things to know that I can get them translating well. And so that's my main set of monitors that I use. And then I also have this little Behringer baritone, which is like a knockoff of the Oratone, like the little mix cubes.
Yeah.
I thought like if I wanted to have a really crappy speaker, it's like, let's just go with the Behringer one. You know, like let's get the clone of let's get the clone of the crappy speaker.
Get the even cheaper one.
Yeah, get the even cheaper one, right? And it's actually amazing. Like so I use it all the time, and it took a little bit of time to get used to, but again, like the more you listen to stuff on it, the more you know how it sounds or what it should sound like. So I use that a lot. I'll still check in the car occasionally, or like on my iPhone, or I've got a little Bluetooth speaker. Like I'm kind of checking a lot of different things before I sign off on it and send it out to someone. But I just moved into a new space, so like it's going to take some calibration for me to learn this new room. And people, so I don't know if you're going to have the video of this, but like people will see that it's not finished at all right now. So I'm still like very much like trying to like get this room done so I can actually start calibrating my ears to this new room. But for years I was like in the same room, and like I didn't even need to go to the car anymore. I just knew kind of what I needed to do to make it sound good there, you know? And again, it just, the more you listen to stuff, the faster you can calibrate your ears to it and get the sound you're going for.
Yeah, I love it, man. Well, I wanted to jump over to like a specific instrument. Like I know you're coming from the drums,
sure,
and you definitely have that pop punk drum sound down. Like, what's your, you know, as like a drummer, you know, what's your philosophy when it comes to, you know, mixing drums, or maybe any tried and true techniques to kind of get that kind of punchy pop punk thing?
I think it's a good question. And as a drummer, I think I really overanalyze drums in a mix. Like it's hard, right? It's like you criticize, like you're your own biggest critic, and especially when it's your own instrument that you play, like you're very like particular about that. So to me, it's like I hate mixing snare because it's like the hardest instrument in the world to me. But But I think one of the biggest tricks with drums is a couple things. One is you do have to make sure that your tracks are edited tight enough, I think, because there is polish in the space between notes. You know, if you have, especially with slower songs, like where there's more space, like when things are locked in time, that gap between notes actually creates more clarity for other instruments to live. And so I think editing is really important when it comes to drums. The other thing too is dynamic control. I really like drums that hit hard and are pretty consistent. I don't really leave a lot of natural dynamics in them, like where it's because it depends on the drummer, but some people are really inconsistent, and you'll get like a really loud snare hit and a really quiet snare hit, and like I think that kind of makes drums get buried in the mix, and especially in like pop punk stuff or rock stuff where like everything is kind of on 10 all the time. You need your drums to stand out, you know. So you need to control those dynamics a little bit. So definitely,
basically, you're saying you need the drums to be on 11 the whole time.
Totally, drums got to be on 11. Kick and snare for sure. Toms you can leave away. But yeah, like I really do think you have to control those a lot with some compression just to like get them consistent throughout the track. And that's one reason why I do always add like drum sample layers as well. And you know, that is another tool that I use for consistency. And I'll blend it. I almost never completely erase the real drums. Like I'll always have them in there somewhere, even if it's just like tucked a little bit under a sample or that kind of thing. Because then you have you can preserve a little bit more of the natural dynamics and then blend it in with something that's a little more consistent and just makes things glue together a little bit better. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think compression's a big one, especially for like rock music, samples, timing. Those are like kind of the big three areas I think when it comes to drums.
Yeah, I'm assuming they're pretty dry when you're doing this kind of like punk stuff, right? Like
totally, yeah. Like and I guess that's something to touch on too, is that a lot of people tend to add effects for the sake of adding effects and think that like they need to add a drum reverb or whatever. And a lot of people don't even consider the reverb time. It's just like they slap on a preset and you know, it might be like a 2-second reverb time, and if it's a fast song, you got no room for 2 seconds. It's just gonna like you know, create so much mud. So you do have to be aware of the reverb time so that you can sync it to the tempo of the song and make it lock in, and or just not have it. You know, depends on what you get. Some people record their drums in really nice spaces, and you can utilize that room sound. And sometimes it's just you're better off without it.
Right. Yeah, it just depends. I like that you also mentioned the space in between the notes. And I feel like people forget that, you know, if it's always blaring, it's nothing, right? Like that space in between the notes is so important. And like as a bass player, you know, it's like when you release your note or when you stop sustaining your note is almost as important as when you start your note, right? Like
100%.
And people don't talk about that. It's like it's not just about the timing of when I hit it with the kick drum. It's also how long do I sustain it for, and what's happening also when when you let go of that note and then something else happens in between. You know, totally. You gotta have that push and pull.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that applies to every instrument. You know, especially with like guitars and that kind of stuff. Like there's a lot of impact that can be made when you have silence before something comes in. You know, and I'm not saying that you like necessarily have to completely gate everything or, you know, make it super, super silent between notes, but sometimes that works really well. And I think in like a lot of the heavier genres that's such a important tool for getting the punch and the impact. But then you might work with a band that's like a little bit more garagey and you want a little bit more of that raw sound. So you let it go a little longer and not hyper edit it, you know? But I do think that like having a sense of timing, having a consistent pulse is really important. So editing does go a long way to making a song sound really good.
Yeah, get that polish.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about podcasting,
sure.
as we're both podcasters. I mean, I'm just curious to hear like what are your thoughts on podcasting? How has it changed you? What's been the best part about podcasting? The whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah. I mean, for me, podcasting, I love it. Like I listen to podcasts all the time myself, so it kind of just made sense that I would make a podcast, you know? I know a lot of other audio educators focus on like YouTube and that kind of stuff. And to be honest, like I find YouTube like kind of tiresome sometimes. And I already make enough content for like my membership and my courses and that kind of stuff. So I'm making these videos all the time. And sometimes it's just like refreshing to have something different. And the podcast is a great avenue for that. And I love that through podcasting, I get to learn from a lot of people. That's really like a big reason why I do it. You know, over the years, I've done my best to answer a lot of I think as far as people creating their own sound, I think that that comes from learning a lot of different techniques and a lot of experimenting with a lot of things. And over the years, I've done my best to kind of tell people what I typically do. But I think it is important to learn from different people and get their experiences and get their opinions and their techniques, and try from that. You can experiment with things and see what works for you. And then that kind of just evolves, and eventually you kind of have your own sound, I guess, like,
Yeah.
because you've kind of taken what works for you and it's your system now. And so podcasting has definitely allowed me to connect with a lot of really cool people and just pick their brains about stuff. And if they worked on an album that I love, then how cool is it that I can like ask somebody about that specific album and get the person who worked on it,
It's so insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was also, he was also a guest on your show, Tim O'Sullivan, who's been a guest on my show. He was telling me, it's like, oh, you have your own mix with the masters. Like, you don't have to sign up. It's like, yeah, it's definitely way cheaper, but it's also way more time consuming. but it's amazing. Like that is really invaluable to ask, like, a person that worked on like some of your favorite records, like how they did it, or a specific question is insane. It's totally invaluable.
Totally.
Yeah. And just, for me also, just like the personal connection of meeting so many people in our industry of like, and how like real they are and how down to earth almost everybody is.
Of course. Well, it was like I said before we hit record.
Everybody. Yeah.
It's like I said before we hit record that so many people in this industry, we're all in it for the same reason. We just love music. And like, we love nerding out about this stuff. We love chatting about it. So it's amazing how you just have to reach out to people and like be like, hey, like, can I ask you a couple of questions? Are you cool with being on a podcast? And it's surprising how many people are down for it. And through just a simple ask, you get to learn from these people. Like, how cool is that? Yeah. But I think a lot of people are just intimidated, and they're like, oh, like if I talk to this person, it's going to be scary. And they're gonna, like, they're going to chew me out for like my own productions or whatever. And it's like, no, people don't care about that. They just want to help people. So, that's totally. really a big reason for why I do it as well. Is just like, I just really want to help people with putting out more music. I think that there's a lot of positive impact that can be made from having music out there. And however I can help people get their songs done, and whether it's me telling them how I do things or if it's one of my podcast guests, it's all helping contribute to the greater good and getting these songs done and putting them out in the world.
Yeah, totally. I don't know if you relate to this, but like I find I prefer to listen to podcasts than to watch YouTube videos, because I find I don't know, I maybe it's just me, but like I'm more of like an audio learner. Like, I could put on a podcast and do dishes and be totally zoned in. And if I have like a YouTube screen open, I'm just like distracted by the million other tabs I have open and all the other things I could be doing on my computer in that moment. And it's just never as immersive, I guess.
Totally, yeah. I'm also like big on listening to things at like 2x. So like, much
doesn't surprise me.
Like my wife hates it, but I'm always blasting like 2x podcasts, and like she's just like, what are you listening to? Like, how do you understand what these people are saying? And
I've never been able to work it up to 2x. I'm at like 1.3 to 1.5 depending on the podcast.
But yeah, I'm just so used to it now that I can like blast through a bunch of podcasts and just learn a ton of cool stuff, like while I'm driving or while I'm doing whatever. So like, how cool is that?
It's amazing. Yeah. We live in an era where we can do almost everything, anything we want. It's all available to us. It's so awesome. Yeah. Well, Mike, this has been so fun. Let's head over to the sauce segment so people can kind of hear what you're working on. You sent me a track called "The Crash" by Deeper You. So let's have a listen to that for about 90 seconds and we'll chat about it.
Awesome. Sounds good.
is us, it's never enough. It's all that we wanted. Oh, it's all that we wanted. Call my name.
Yeah, Mike, sounds like epic. I feel
Thanks,
it's
man.
like that like Van Halen kind of intro, like Running with the Devil or something.
That's
with the
totally what
guitar.
I thought of when I first heard it.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. I'm glad it's not just me. And like we didn't get into it in the. I mean, I heard it before we got on our call, and like later on there was a dope bass solo, but it's not in the first 90 seconds.
Yeah.
And yeah, drums sound epic. Like yeah, I love the sound of the it's just so full. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Tell me a bit about that. What went into that song?
Yeah, so this band Deeper You, they're from Austria, and I've worked on another track of theirs before, like a few years ago, and they were just like, they contacted me recently and were like, hey, we're putting out a new record, or we want to do it. And traditionally, they've gone to like a bigger studio to get their stuff done, and they also had another guy in the band who was an engineer himself and he was like really good at that kind of stuff, but he left the band. And so this time around, they're like, what do we do? Should we like go back to the big studio, hire someone else to record it? Or can we do it ourselves? That kind of thing. So I kind of just like had a good chat with them and was like, try it yourself. If you think you can do it, go for it. Right. So they sent me the track, and right away the drums were horrible, to be honest. You know, they're probably listening to this podcast, but they know I've talked to them about it. When I first listened to like the drums, like every track, it was amazing how much bleed there was. Like the snare track had just as much kick on it as the snare, or just as much hi-hat as the snare. The toms had the same thing, right? It was like,
where did they place their mics?
So afterwards, after I did the mix, I was chatting with the singer like maybe 2 or 3 months afterwards, and we were just chatting about it, and he was like, oh, what can we do better next time around? And I was like, well, the drums were pretty horrible. And he's like, yeah, we were kind of just like, we didn't know what we were doing. And it kind of came out that I'm pretty sure they were using omnidirectional mics on every drum, like every piece of the kit.
That's hilarious.
So I think that's why there was just so much bleed in it, that it was just like, those drums were pretty difficult to work with. So I couldn't gate them because they were just all over the place. And so what I had to do with the drum tracks was just like kind of, I had to create like key spikes off of everything. Like basically convert all the audio to MIDI and, you know, go through every single hit and like create MIDI notes. And that was pretty much the only way to like create isolated tracks and like, you know, re-trigger some stuff and add some samples. And so with the kit at the end, it was sampled kick and snare and toms. Like all the close mics were basically like, I had to take them out of the session because they were just unusable and so noisy. But I did keep like the overheads, and they had some spot mics on the cymbals, and those worked because I needed to keep.
Yeah,
that,
the
like,
cymbals sounded great actually.
Yeah, so I need to keep like the natural cymbal sound, because if I added like cymbal samples, it would have just sounded weird, I thought. So so I kind of just made this like hybrid mix of their raw sounds with the samples. So that was the drums. Like it was a lot of work to get the drums done, but they're also kind of a band that sounds to me like they're almost like Depeche Mode, but like a heavier version of them. And so I kind of wanted that like kind of super, not electronic-y sounding snare, but like super consistent sounding snare where like it kind of had that old 80s sound.
It was
so the samples kind of worked out in my favor with that. So that was the drums. And then guitar wise, they sent me DI tracks and amp tracks, which is what I usually ask for. But I noticed when I looked at the session that the DI tracks were different than the amp sounds. It was almost like something went weird there, or they just recorded one guitar with an amp and then one guitar with a DI. So I had to reamp a lot. But it was cool. Like, you know, I love like projects like that are kind of fun and challenging in their own way. But I had a lot of fun piecing it together, and I really like the song. I think it's a cool. It's not my typical, like I work on so much like pop punk stuff, and to have something a little heavier, I love working on heavy stuff. It's fun.
Yeah, I don't even know what genre it is, because it's like the guitars remind me of Van Halen, but the drums are way heavier. And
the cool thing about that band, and I didn't realize it at the time, is that there's, I think it's like 5 people in the band, and it's like they have 3 different generations of people. Like their guitar player is like 20 years old, their singer's like 45, and then their bass player is like 82. Like they're like, yeah, seriously, like I had no idea. And like they're all over the place, and they just play, like they just are all serious musicians and love it, and like get together and just make that music. It's crazy. So
that's wild.
It's pretty wild. And I think you can hear it. Like I think you can hear the different generations of influence in their music, and it all comes together to something really cool.
I really dug that bass solo. It was like so simple, but like just like it was nice to have like I don't know, I'm a bass player, but like
Yeah.
it was just like very tasty and musical. And like, do you remember what you did there with like, it was like pretty fuzzed up. Did it come in that way?
I think that I used the bass was pretty clean now that I think about it. I'm pretty sure I used the BK7 plugin, the Dark Glass bass pedal.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is it BK7? I always confuse the model.
I don't know, but I know about the Dark Glass.
Yeah, so like that Dark Glass pedal like can go like insanely dirty, and so I think I just slapped that on for that spot, and maybe it's on the rest of the track. I can't remember now, but yeah, it was just like let's just fuzz this up, and there's something to the idea of like it's called the crash, and so I kind of wanted it to sound a little chaotic, and like there are parts in the song where things sound super saturated, and I think at the end of the song, like as it just gets bigger and bigger. I did find at one point that like I was overloading some plugins and it was kind of creating some distortion. But like the more I listened to it and like the more I was like, I actually like this, like it's like technically the quote unquote wrong way, but it sounded cool. So it was like, I want this chaos. I want this fuzz. And like when the last chord rings out, you can hear a little bit of saturation from like some of these plugins and it just sounded cool. And that's something that, I talked about with the band. It was like, we wanted to create this like epic thing where it just keeps growing and growing and getting more chaotic. And so in the end, that's kind of what happens. And it worked out.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, distortion and saturation is part of the modern sound in today's musical landscape. It's funny. It's like, even in top 40, it's like you never know how much distortion or what it's going to sound like. There's no right and wrong anymore with this stuff, That seems to be where we're at.
It's funny. Like I never really used to use a lot of distortion and still to this day, like I think I use a lot of distortion on bass more than anything.
Your bass pokes out really nicely. Like the mixes I checked out, their bass was like separated from the kick, but also like totally like, very audible, like present and full and punchy.
Thank you. To me, the thing with bass is like distortion is your best friend with bass because it does give you that harmonic content that allows it to translate on smaller speakers. And usually I split out my bass and I'll have like a clean DI track and then I'll have a super distorted version of it. I'll just duplicate that DI and super fuzz it up. And to me, I find that gives me like a lot of control as to controlling a good clean low end sound and then adding those harmonics in that make it fit on a smaller set of speakers.
Do you high pass them differently?
Sometimes. I used to do that a lot more, and I just find now like I just keep both kind of unfiltered in that sense. Because
blend it to taste kind of thing.
Yeah, because there is something nice about having that like clean low end of the bass, but then also having like the clean finger noise of the bass as well, and like that attack. And then the fuzz just kind of fills in the gaps in between.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are you usually using like the Dark Glass thing, or are you like Decapitator? It's a mix.
I actually, for the longest time, used the Pro Tools SansAmp plugin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like the PSA one or whatever. I only recently got the Dark Glass one, and I love it now. Like to me, that does everything that I couldn't get out of the SansAmp. I do have a physical SansAmp rack, and I sometimes will feed things through that. I love the SansAmp sound. Like there's just something cool about it, and it just can really transform a clean DI track into something pretty gnarly sometimes.
Yeah.
It's funny if you solo my bass tracks, you're like, wow, there's a lot of distortion on this. But then when you listen to the context of the mix, you don't hear that distortion at all. It just sounds like it fits in because it blends with the guitars and all that kind of stuff. So I think sometimes you can get away with a lot of distortion on bass, and it definitely works.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my experience of when you're working on like heavier music, when it's more like the kind of stuff that you're mostly working on, like punk and like metal and stuff, like that's where like the distortion in the bass is almost not audible above the drums and the guitars and stuff, and like, but it does help it poke through. And I think just depending on like the genre, I mean, obviously a little bit of distortion is almost always good, but
yeah,
like.
Totally.
But if you want to really, really mangle it, I think it works. It's less audible in like the kind of genres you're working on than all the genres,
Totally, yeah. I mean, if you're working on like an 80s ballad, then it's going to sound a little weird, because there's again like the space between notes has a big role in how clear things sound, right? And if you have a lot of space, you're going to notice that distortion in there. But like something fast, like a lot of the stuff I work on, like you can dirty it up, and it's not you're not even going to notice it for the most part.
Yeah, totally. Amazing. Well, Mike, this has been so fun. I really learned a lot talking with you.
Likewise.
And as we kind of draw the interview towards a close, I like to ask people the kind of same general set of questions. And I don't know, you may have already sort of answered this just by it just seems like your attitude is just so full of energy. But I always ask people about keeping, staying jazzed to get into the studio and do the work that we do, because not every day is the day that you want to get in there and do it. And although we love what we do, so how do you stay inspired and stay so energized to get into the studio every day?
I think it just comes back down to that like constant urge to learn. And I find I can learn something in everything I work on, and I really enjoy that part of it. I enjoy assembling the puzzle, like I really do enjoy that and the challenge that comes with it. So to me, that is like honestly one of the biggest reasons why I do it all the time. Like I really enjoy that process. Yeah, some days are a little harder than others, but you kind of just have to go in and find the things that do excite you, and I'm also really blessed to be able to say like I'm doing this on my own, like I'm full time with this, and like how cool is that I get to work on audio. I should be grateful for the fact that I get to do this every day. I'm not sitting at a desk and that kind of thing. So yeah, sometimes it's just like that reality check of like, yeah, how cool is it that I'm doing it on my own? Like this, why would I just like slack off now?
Yeah,
doesn't make sense.
We've come so far. Don't screw it up.
Exactly. It's like I got to preserve this. How I don't want to go to a desk job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just think from just my observation, just chatting with you, it's just like you just seem to have like this internal energy of just like, just like a Energizer battery, Energizer bunny.
I crash hard sometimes, but yeah,
affinity towards the art and the craft of doing it and experimenting, and yes,
Yeah.
that's great, man. That's your superpower. You just keep
Thank you.
at it. Yeah, well,
Thank you, man.
it takes a lot of energy to chug away at a book. So,
Oh yeah.
I think I haven't done it yet.
It really does. I mean, depending on what you got going on too. Like I have a good friend of mine he is an author as well, and he told me like every morning he dedicates an hour of the day to writing a book, and he's very prolific with it. He's got like 8 books in like 3 years or something like that, and like I'm just like I again, going back to like how I said like I kind of thrive sometimes on like not having a consistent schedule. I couldn't do that. Like I couldn't have a consistent schedule where I'm like, I'm going to write every day at this time. Like, I don't know. There's something to like being motivated at the time and just going all in at that time,
Yeah, I like that. I need more of that in my life. So excellent. Amazing. So awesome. So I guess just the last question of the show remains, which if you've heard any episodes, then you kind of are expecting it, but I'm kind of rebranding it now as less about, it's still about your journey, but as like, what would be that advice you'd give to someone who's kind of coming up now based on your journey? Was there something that you either regret that you did, or was there something that you're really happy that you did that kind of got you to where you are today that you'd want to impart on the listener who's maybe more at the beginning of the journey than you are?
Totally. That's a great question. To me, I think that the biggest advice I can give to people is just put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to ask favors or to like ask people questions, and really just try to network with people. If anything, that's the one thing that I kind of do regret in my past, is that like when I was trying to be a musician, like all I cared about was just like my band and like, just playing shows and this and that. And we played with so many amazing bands that like, I wish that I had done a better job at the time to like connect with those people and to like maintain those relationships, so that as I eventually ended up as an engineer, like I could have probably gone to some of those guys and had relationships with them as clients or, just like collaborators and working together. So I really do think that people should just make a good effort to keep in touch with people and like network really well. I don't know if this is actually a true attributed quote. I think I heard on like the Tim Ferriss podcast, he said that this quote's from Mike Tyson, that to be a friend, you have to have to have friends, you have to be a friend. And right. I think that that's such a really powerful thing. And it's like a constant thing I think about where it's like, yeah, I should reach out to people I haven't talked to in a while. Like, to me, like I would just consider people my friends. And like, my wife's like, these aren't always your friends. They're just like an acquaintance from like someone, from a show or whatever. I'm like, no, I consider them my friends. And I have to reach out to people more often. And I think networking is so important. And I think part of the detriment to the internet is that people tend to hide behind the internet as well. And they don't really make enough of an effort to just have that outreach. And that goes a long way. So, just don't be afraid to like put yourself out there and ask questions. And, it's like we talked about earlier with like the podcast stuff. Like I just reach out to big names all the time to have them on my podcast, not expecting anything out of it, but it surprises me every time how like a small little ask now means that I get to have a conversation with someone who I admire, and I learn from that. So now we're in the circle. We can chat beyond the podcast or whatever, So it's just like network, and keep those relationships open. I think that's a really important thing that a lot of people forget about. And so, that's my biggest piece of advice there.
Yeah, I love it, man. And it's been so true for me also of just building because I think I've mentioned this like probably ad nauseum on the podcast already of like, we all work in our man/woman caves forever, and we don't know what's going on outside of what we're obsessed with and going down rabbit holes with, and I think if I hadn't gone to AES in 2017, I wouldn't have realized that I could chat with other people that do what we do. And I was like, oh, they're just like me. That's cool. I could probably schmooze with them. And then I probably wouldn't have started this podcast. I met so many people that are amazing and great at what they do, just like almost everyone's been so genuine,
Totally.
So,
we're all just passionate about this, and we all want to just do more of it, and like I'm glad that we connected, and now we have a lot of things in common, and beyond this interview, like we'll be in touch, and we'll
exactly
probably piggyback off each other and ask each other questions and learn a lot, and like how cool is that like we can do that stuff, and that's just through a simple cold outreach, So man, I think that is such an important thing that people forget about all the time. Is you just gotta maintain those, like put yourself out there to create those relationships, but then also maintain it as well.
Yeah, totally. You just reminded me that the reason why I reached out to you was Alex Crescioni mentioned you should reach out to Mike. I was like, oh yeah, you're totally right, because I'd reached out to you and you said but I'm busy right now, blah blah blah. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll get back to it, and then I kind of forgot about it. And then Alex was like, and I just remembered Alex when you were talking about the Rockets, because he also is a KRK user. So
Alex is great. I love Alex.
Got some devoted KRK people. So
totally. And Alex is a great person, like who I had him on my podcast, and now we email each other like on a regular basis just to like check in and see how things are doing, and it's like, how cool is that? So
it's so cool. Yeah, and I got to Alex through my buddy Travis's podcast, Progressions. So
and Travis is another guy who I had on my podcast. We were talking about, before we hit record, I was telling you about how I was saying that
I must have listened to that episode. I think I did.
Maybe, yeah, but Travis is like, when I interviewed him, he was just about to have his baby, and so we got into like the dad chat and everything. So now we've like kind of kept in touch because of the dad thing, and it's
amazing.
It's fun. Yeah.
All right. Well, 3 guys having 3 girls. So
yeah, there you go.
Excellent. Good stuff. Good stuff all around. Well, definitely the relationship thing is awesome, and it's been great to meet you. And this was a great chat. I really learned a lot, and it was so fun. So thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me, man. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Secret Sonics. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you've been digging the show, it would be awesome if you could share this episode or your favorite episode with a friend or two, and or leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher of choice. That's it for now. Have a great week. Take care and dig in. See you soon. Bye-bye.